All right, so vineyards, right. Sun-drenched hills, rows of grapevines. Sounds pretty dreamy. At least that's how I always pictured it. Until we actually started digging into this whole Vineyard Manager thing. Turns out it's a lot more than sipping Pinot Noir at sunset.
You got that right. It's definitely not all idyllic scenery.
Yeah.
Being a vineyard manager, it's actually a pretty demanding leadership role.
For real. So like more than just having a green thumb.
Way more. You're basically orchestrating this whole journey from grape to glass. Every single step.
Okay, so walk us through that. When you say entire process, what are we talking about here? Give me the down low.
Think of it like conducting an orchestra. But instead of instruments, you're dealing with sunshine, soil, and all those different grape varietals.
Okay, I'm kind of getting it.
You're responsible for the vineyard's health, right? So that's planting, pruning, protecting against diseases, pests, the whole 9 yards. Then there's the actual winemaking part. You're monitoring fermentation, making decisions about blending and aging. It's a real balancing act, science and art all rolled into one.
Wow, okay, so you need that deep viticulture knowledge, for sure. But then there's the business side too, right? Got to make sure the vineyard actually turns a profit.
Exactly. Budgeting, analyzing market trends, even marketing and administration can fall under the vineyard manager's to-do list. Especially with these smaller wineries, you're wearing a lot of hats. It's a role that requires some serious adaptability, that's for sure.
Speaking of which, I was kind of surprised to see mathematics pop up as a key skill in RoleCatcher's guide. Didn't really peg math as a vintner's best friend.
Yeah, it's more about data analysis than, hardcore calculus. Thank goodness, right?
Right.
But vineyard managers these days, they're using data more and more to make decisions. Like, think about predicting how much you'll harvest based on the weather, or figuring out the best times to irrigate, even analyzing the soil composition to, fine-tune the grape's flavor. It's actually pretty fascinating stuff.
See, now that's what I call a deep dive fact. So we're talking sharp minds, not just green thumbs.
Yeah.
But let's be real. The guide also mentions long and irregular hours. Is it always peak season in the vineyard?
Well, it's definitely cyclical. You've got those crazy busy periods, planting, pruning, harvesting. It's all hands on deck, often on a tight deadline, and sometimes you're battling crazy weather. Remember that frost a few years back that devastated vineyards across the region?
Yeah.
High stakes, my friend. High stakes.
Sounds intense. So you need nerves of steel to go with that love of the land. The guide does mention high job satisfaction as a major plus. But let's be real, what about the downsides? Is it really as dreamy as it sounds?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Separating the dream from reality. Yeah, there's something really satisfying about nurturing a vineyard, seeing that transformation from bud to bottle. But, it's physically demanding work. You're out there in the elements, and the market, well, it can be unpredictable. Even the most well-managed vineyard can take a hit.
Okay, so more than just loving wine, then. What about the skills needed? I'm guessing it's more than just knowing your Merlot from your Malbec, right?
You said it. Let's dive into the functions and core abilities section. This is where it gets really interesting, because the top skills might surprise you.
Hit me with it. What are we talking about?
Think critical thinking, reading comprehension, and knowing how to communicate effectively. Those are the big ones, the cornerstones of being a successful vineyard manager.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. Sudden pest infestation, freak weather.
Yeah.
You got to be able to think on your feet.
Exactly. And reading comprehension, it's not just about appreciating those wine reviews. You're dealing with complex regulations, scientific research on viticulture. It's about staying ahead of the curve.
And let's not forget communication. You got to manage your team, work with suppliers, maybe even schmooze some potential investors at a tasting.
100%. You've got to know how to convey your passion, your expertise.
Make them feel it.
Exactly. Now, here's the one that might throw you for a loop. Mathematics. It ranks surprisingly high on the list.
Math. Seriously. I thought we were talking tannins and terroir, not like trigonometry.
It all comes back to that business side we were talking about. Budgeting, analyzing yields and pricing, all that requires some number crunching. Remember, a vineyard, as romantic as it sounds, is still a business.
True, true. And those grapes aren't turning into profit on their own.
Exactly.
Okay, so definitely not all about sipping and swirling. Say someone's listening to all this and they're intrigued. They're ready to trade their spreadsheets for pruning shears. How do they actually break into such a competitive field? RoleCatcher even uses the word standout when they're describing the career path. It's clearly not as easy as just, showing up with a love for Pinot Grigio.
You're telling me it's competitive out there. Luckily, they've laid out the typical career stages, and it usually starts with something aspiring vineyard managers might be familiar with. Internships.
So paying your dues, getting your hands dirty, literally starting from the ground up.
Pretty much. It's all about getting that hands-on experience. Pruning, trellising, really understanding the rhythm of the vineyard. You're learning from the pros, proving you're serious about this. Then, as you gain knowledge and confidence, you might move into a supervisory role.
Which means more responsibility, right?
You bet. You're overseeing a team, making sure things get done right and on time, especially during those critical times like harvest, when every decision can impact the quality of the vintage.
Talk about pressure. And then from there, it's on to assistant vineyard manager,
Yeah.
right? Getting closer to the top spot.
Exactly. You're moving from like just doing the work to actual strategy, thinking about the budget, making long-term plans. You're working side by side with the vineyard manager to make those big decisions.
So it's not just about knowing your grapes. It's knowing how to make the whole vineyard thrive as a business.
100%. And since we're talking business, one thing that really stuck out to me in RoleCatcher's Guide was the emphasis on understanding terroir. You know, it's one of those words you hear a lot in the wine world.
Yeah.
But it's more than just a fancy way of saying soil.
Okay, break it down for us. Why is terroir such a big deal for a vineyard manager?
It's like the secret ingredient, the thing that makes each wine unique. You got to think about it.
Oh.
The soil, how high up the vineyard is, the climate, even the plants growing nearby. It all impacts the flavor of the grapes.
So like a Pinot Noir from Burgundy is going to taste different from a Pinot from, say, Oregon.
Yeah.
Even if it's the same grape.
Exactly. And a good vineyard manager, they know how to work with their terroir, how to bring out those unique characteristics. So you end up with a wine that really reflects where it's from. It's kind of cool when you think about it.
That is pretty cool. Like each vineyard has its own fingerprint, its own story it's telling through the wine.
Yeah.
But let's talk about telling that story to the world. Because RoleCatcher mentioned that some vineyard managers, they handle the marketing, even sales. That sounds like a whole other skill set.
It is, especially for these smaller wineries. You're not just making the wine, you're crafting its image, connecting with people who really know their stuff.
And speaking of knowing their stuff, the guide also mentioned how online wine sales are, like, exploding.
Yeah.
How's that changing things for vineyard managers?
Oh, it's huge. It's not just about those local tastings anymore. You got to have a strong online presence, a way to reach people who might be miles away.
So a tech-savvy vineyard manager, who knew? But going back to the career path for a sec, I gotta say, I was super intrigued by something else RoleCatcher highlighted. They actually had an example profile of a vineyard manager with a PhD.
Wow.
Talk about dedication.
Right. It just shows you that the learning never really stops in this field. You could have years of experience, but there are always new techniques, new practices, even things like wine tourism to consider. It's amazing.
That's what I love about these deep dives. There's always more to uncover. But not everyone can, get a PhD. So for those who are ready to jump in, get their hands dirty, what are some practical steps they can take to stand out?
Well, first things first, get that hands-on experience. Internships are so valuable, even if you're starting at the very bottom. And don't underestimate networking.
Right, because it's not just what you know, it's who you know. And in the wine world, I bet those connections are everything.
They really are. Go to industry events, join those professional organizations, reach out to local wineries for even just informational interviews. People in this industry are so passionate. They love sharing what they know.
It's all about building those relationships. And hey, maybe you'll find a mentor who can, show you the ropes. But even with the skills and the connections, landing that dream job, it can be intimidating.
That's where RoleCatcher's tools come in. That AI-powered resume builder, for instance, is amazing. It analyzes job descriptions and makes sure your resume highlights the right skills.
So you're basically tailoring your experience to match what they're looking for.
Exactly. No more generic resumes. You got to stand out. And then there are the interview prep tools. Think mock interviews, a whole library of practice questions, because even the most experienced vineyard manager can get a little flustered in an interview.
Oh, I can only imagine.
So yeah, it's about walking into that interview feeling prepared, confident, ready to knock them dead.
Exactly.
And you know what else I love about RoleCatcher? Their Get Discovered feature.
Oh, yeah. That's where employers find you.
Yeah.
Like a digital headhunter, but for aspiring vineyard managers.
Exactly. It's about putting yourself out there, showcasing your skills on a platform that's designed to connect you with the right opportunities. Take some of the pressure off that constant job searching.
Game changer, especially for people who are, switching careers into the wine world. Speaking of which, I was curious about those alternative titles we saw earlier. It seems like there are different paths that all lead to basically the same role.
There are. For instance, you might see vineyard supervisor. That usually means someone who's overseeing a team of workers, making sure everything gets done, especially during those crucial times like harvest.
So more hands-on,
Yeah.
like boots on the ground leadership.
Yep. And then there's fruit production team leader. That one broadens the scope a bit. It could be orchards, berry farms, but it shows you've got those transferable skills in managing fruit production, whatever it is.
So your experience with grapevines could translate to like managing apple trees.
Totally. Then we've got hop farmer. Might seem like a jump, but hops, they're climbing plants too. And they need similar growing conditions and techniques as grapes.
Oh, interesting. So someone who knows about hops could potentially use those skills in a vineyard.
It's definitely possible. It shows that what you learn in one area of agriculture can often be applied to another. And speaking of surprising connections, there's arboriculturist.
Wait, isn't that like a tree surgeon? What does that have to do with vineyards?
You think about it. Grapes are vines, but they're often trained to grow on trellises. And those trellises, they're kind of similar to trees, structurally speaking. So knowing about pruning, pest control, even just how to keep a plant healthy, that's all valuable, even in a vineyard.
It's all connected.
Right. And then there's the vineyard cellar master. That one sounds like a dual role, kind of bridging the gap between the vineyard and the actual winery.
So they're involved in the whole process, from grape to bottle.
Pretty much. A very specialized role, but it highlights how interconnected everything is.
It's like a chef who grows their own herbs and veggies. Total control.
Love that analogy. But whether they're called a vineyard manager, a cellar master, or even a hop farmer, one thing's for sure. You got to keep learning.
Because the world of viticulture never stands still.
Exactly. RoleCatcher really emphasizes that. Going to conferences, reading up on the latest research, experimenting with new sustainable practices.
It's about being a lifelong student of the craft, always pushing yourself to be better. And speaking of pushing yourself, we haven't even touched on climate change. I mean, that's got to be a huge challenge for vineyards.
You're telling me crazy weather patterns, new pests, diseases. Vineyard managers are on the front lines of dealing with all that.
A lot of times it's about finding new, sustainable ways of doing things.
Exactly. Water conservation, using beneficial insects for pest control. Vineyard managers are coming up with creative solutions to protect their crops and the environment. It's pretty amazing to see.
It's like they're stewards of the land. They get that the health of their vineyard is connected to the health of the whole planet. It's a lot to handle, but it's inspiring to see how they're adapting.
True innovators, for sure. Finding that balance between like the old ways and the new. And speaking of which, RoleCatcher, they don't just focus on the technical stuff. They also talk about those soft skills, those interpersonal things that can really make a difference.
Right, because you're not just managing vines, you're managing people.
100%. You can know everything about grapes, but if you can't communicate with your team, resolve conflicts, motivate people, that's not going to fly.
Yeah, it's about leadership, right?
Absolutely. And those leadership skills, they come up everywhere. Dealing with suppliers, working with investors, even handling those unexpected crises that pop up.
Oh, I bet.
Like, imagine right before harvest, a whole flock of birds descends on your vineyard.
Oh, no. That's like a nightmare. What do you even do in that situation?
Let's just say it involves a lot of netting, some quick thinking, and a good sense of humor.
You gotta laugh, right? Otherwise you'd cry. Speaking of which, RoleCatcher's Guide, they do a good job of like outlining the skills you need, and some of them you might not expect.
Totally. Like critical thinking, for instance. It's a big one.
Makes sense though, right? You've got weather, pests. Mother Nature's got her own plans sometimes.
Exactly. You got to be able to assess a situation, figure out what to do, and make a decision fast.
And then there's reading comprehension. I mean, that seems kind of obvious.
You'd think so, right?
Got to be able to read those wine labels.
True, but it's way more than that. Think scientific journals, industry reports, all those dense documents. A vineyard manager needs to stay informed.
So a curious mind is key.
For sure. And let's not forget communication skills. It's not just about, talking to the vines.
Although I bet some vineyard managers have tried.
I wouldn't be surprised. But you're communicating with your team, your suppliers, even those tough wine critics.
It's about getting people excited about your wines.
Right. Yeah, sharing that passion, that expertise. You're not just selling a product, you're sharing an experience.
I love that. And it speaks to that like deeper level of dedication that a good vineyard manager has.
It really does. And that passion, it's contagious. It inspires your team. It comes through in the wine.
You can taste the love.
Exactly. As we've been talking about all this, I keep thinking about how RoleCatcher emphasized vision.
A vision.
Yeah, like being able to see the bigger picture,
Yeah.
knowing where you want to go, what you want to achieve.
So not just reacting to what's happening now, but planning for the future.
Exactly. Maybe it's trying a new sustainable practice or bringing back an old type of grape. It's about leaving your mark.
Leaving a legacy, one delicious bottle at a time.
Now you're getting it. And that's what I'd say to anyone who's feeling inspired by all of this. Think big. It's not just a job, it's a chance to really make a difference.
So any final words of wisdom for aspiring vineyard managers? Besides, brushing up on their algebra.
Just reach out. Seriously, the wine world is full of amazing people. Go to a tasting, connect with someone online. You'd be surprised how many folks are happy to share what they know.
Such good advice. Find those mentors, build those relationships.
Because in the end, the journey is just as important as the destination, right?
Couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of vineyard managers. Big thanks to RoleCatcher for giving us the inside scoop. For anyone who's feeling inspired, remember those words. Reach out, connect, and who knows, maybe you'll be crafting your own award-winning vintage someday. Cheers to that.